And what's going on, everybody? Welcome back to another episode of MLS History Retold on the Designated Players and MLS podcast. This week, we have conflicting stories of heartbreak and elation. First, we dive into the details around one of the biggest what-ifs in MLS history, when MLS blocked Taylor Twellman's move to the Preston North End. Then, we'll raise your spirits with a heartwarming story of how MLS made its way to Seattle and how the fans controlled the naming of the team. I'm Andrew, that's Connor, and this is MLS History Retold. How you doing, buddy?
I'm excited for this episode, and I don't want to knock people's submissions for MLS history, but there's a lot of stories where, it's just kind of like this Eastern Conference leg, like playoff game, or this like regular season game where it was like exciting and a lot of goals were scored. This one like actually feels like we're talking about some like more niche stuff and not just like covering a game.
It's fair. Yeah, like I said, this opened my eyes to, like, I always knew Seattle was strong in the fan base, but this opened my eyes to why. So I'm really excited to dive into that. I'm more excited to dive into your scarf because I've got a great
I don't I don't have a New England scarf, so a little bit of a stretch, but considering we're talking about him moving to England, I brought out the only England scarf that I own, and it is for the future Conference League champions in Chelsea.
Oh, how the mighty have fallen.
That's all right. Just like a phoenix, we will be reborn.
Well, Connor, I mentioned to you I got a scarf of a team that I didn't know if I would ever get a chance to link to MLS.
I feel like I know which scarf you're bringing out.
Which scarf am I bringing out?
Is it a Tacoma scarf?
It's not a Tacoma scarf.
Oh,
For my successful defense, my brother, little old Matt, got me a scarf from an Indonesian Premier League team. And I was like, how am I going to link this? Well, I'll have you know, Connor, I'm talking about Seattle and how they named their team, right? Seattle came in 2008 and did a really good job, but there was this thing called a homegrown player, right? And their fourth homegrown player, the youngest ever signing, 17 years old, was named Victor Mansoret. Ring a bell?
nope.
Of course not, because he lasted 2 years before moving overseas after playing for the Charleston Battery. He played in Vietnam for a while, for a couple of times, just counting up here. So he played for Vietnam, like 5 or 6 Vietnam teams, until he finally landed at a team called PSM Makassar. Do you know what league PSM Makassar plays in, Connor?
I'm gonna guess the Indonesian league.
The Indonesian Premier League, Connor. So I have a link between the Seattle Sounders and the Indonesian Premier League, and I get to bring out the Indonesian scarf.
Is that for the league or is that a team in the league?
This is a team in the league. I'm fairly certain. It is a sick looking scarf, though.
Yeah, we got an outbar scarf game here in the US.
Isn't it? So I've tried my best to figure out which team it is, but this is one of the cooler ones I've seen. But I was able to link it, and it's got the colors of their secondary kit, the red and yellow. So it looks like it fits, but it also has the link to the Indonesian Premier League. So on my final day in Alfred, I have successfully linked MLS to the Indonesian Premier League. And I know you were probably thinking like, oh, he's going to do FC Dallas because Martin Paez is now Indonesian. Nope, cop out. I've got the direct.
Well, the people said you wouldn't be able to do it, and you did it.
And
So
the people are you. You're the hater on this pod.
I if you can find a message where I said you wouldn't be able to link it, then by all means, prove me wrong.
I got it here. You know what else I have here?
Not a brain.
Good one. I said not enough information on Taylor Twellman's move to Preston North End. Why don't you fill me in?
Taylor Twellman. Why'd you say it like that?
I said Taylor Twellman. What?
I heard Taylor Twellman.
I may be a bit dyslexic. Leave me alone.
It's okay. So you may not have all the knowledge on Twellman's failed move to England, but I do. Not all of it, but I got a lot. I got a lot here. And some of it is coming from a couple of really good sources that I found for this episode. One of which is an article called Tailor Made for Preston by Joe Drabel of Sky Sports. Another is an article called Taylor Twellman Tells His Side of the Story After Preston Move Was Famously Blocked by Ollie Dawes of Deepdale Digest, as well as grabbing some information as well from Wikipedia and Transfer Market, as always. So, in January 2008, a wild transfer saga kicks off between the New England Revolution, Taylor Twellman, and Preston North End, which would see the star MLS man enraged as his move was rejected by the Revs and MLS. It's crazy to see how far the league has come from then to today. To put this into perspective, imagine that in January 2024, so just before this 2024 MLS season kicked off, Rotherham United, sitting 24th in the championship, comes in to make a wild bid for Carles Heel, star of New England Revolution and MVP only 3 seasons prior. Well, that was the exact situation going on with Twellman in 2008. Preston were only a few seasons removed from being in the Premier League, but at the time of the move, Preston was sitting bottom of the championship, below teams like Scunthorpe United and Colchester United. Yet Twellman was enraged that the move was blocked. I'd imagine Preston would be enraged as well, because they would be getting a steal in this case with Twellman, who was the 2005 Golden Boot winner and MVP, and one of the best, if not the best, strikers in the league, even prior to the 2008 season. Preston had originally bid $1.7 million, but the bid was rejected. Further bids were made until the price got up to $3.5 million, which was also rejected. Had this move had gone through at $3.5 million, it would have been the second highest transfer fee in MLS history at the time. That amount was so good for the league that Twellman was actually quoted as saying, "I had 2 houses picked out already. My bags were packed and ready to go because I just didn't think they were going to say no to that number." A big payday for the league, and still seemingly a win-win, as Preston will get a very talented player for a reasonable price. Even better, it's another win for Twellman himself, as he is quoted in the Sky Sports article as saying that his salary would have tripled by moving to Preston. So if everybody is winning, why is the move being rejected? That's the question Twellman was certainly asking, as the anchored star for the Revs was quoted by Sky Sports as saying, "I'm everywhere from confused to mad because I don't know where I am on this. It's at the point where I feel they've got to compensate me, whether it's with money or more guaranteed years. I just want something to happen." In typical MLS lack of transparency fashion, Twellman can't even find who the right person is to ask why the move is blocked, as he's quoted saying, "When I ask MLS, they say the Revs rejected it. When I ask the Revs, they say it was MLS." This move was a dream move for Twellman, who had been angling for a move to England for the few years prior to 2008, dating back to even prior to 2006. Twellman was quoted as wanting the move to England as he felt his game would fit the style in England very well, plus he can get paid more than in the still very new MLS league. However, even back then, it was not easy for someone outside of the EU to get a permit to play in England, as you need to play 75% of competitive games for the national team. In 2006, Twellman had those England dreams temporarily crushed, as he was the last man cut from the 2006 World Cup roster, which would have gotten him the permit to make the move to England. Luckily, a very keen Bob Bradley was aware of Twellman's situation and decided he would involve Twellman in the national team so he could reach the 75% threshold needed to get the permit. And that's exactly what he did. You could argue that based on Twellman's performances up to that point in his career, he likely should have been in the national team picture anyway. Taylor said that on the day he played the national team game to make him eligible to move to England, he got a phone call from his agent where he said that both Newcastle United and Preston North End were very interested in him. The problem, as stated before, was that the league and team did not want to let him go. One of the fair gripes that people make about this league is how much it is able to control with the system that it has in place. Preston manager Alan Irvine echoed this even back then with a quote saying, "If the league says he's not going anywhere, he is not going anywhere." The Twellman situation is not the only time that the league has gotten involved with transfers. As recent as this season, the league rejected a move between FC Dallas and Spartak Moscow, which would have seen Ferreira command a fee of roughly $13 million. In this case, however, the move was clearly blocked due to political reasons surrounding Russia's invasion of Ukraine, but nonetheless, it showed that MLS has the power to stop a move, and could have possibly been the reason Twellman didn't get his, considering he was such a star of the league at a crucial point in the league's development. Twellman not getting his move to England in January 2008 may have been the worst thing to happen to him in his career, as during the 2008 season, where he could have been playing for Preston in England, he was instead stuck playing in MLS. On August 30th, 2008, in a game against the Galaxy, the Rev star would suffer a neck injury and severe concussion after a mid-air collision with Galaxy keeper Steve Cronin. While he still played the rest of the 2008 season, the injury would linger and put him out of virtually the entire 2009 season. Not only that, but he wouldn't be able to take the field again in 2010 as well, missing the entire season due to this head injury, after which he made the decision to retire at only the age of 30. This is the exact reason why fans should not criticize players for making moves for money, in my opinion, because you never know when your career can suddenly end. So make the most of it while you can. And the reason I bring this up is because I stumbled across some people back in 2008 complaining about Twellman's move to Preston just being a money grab. But after not getting the move, he would never be able to get that kind of money again, as he had to retire early on due to the injury he suffered. While Twellman today is still one of the greatest strikers and players in MLS history, his career might be one of the biggest what ifs in history, both imagining what could have happened in MLS if he didn't get injured, or if he got that dream move to England.
Yeah, that's always going to be one of the biggest, and I think you put it properly. Fair gripes is the control over movement, right? It is unprecedented how much they are overseeing the move of just individual players from clubs, right? And that's a fair gripe, but again, a big what if. And I find it funny where you're people complaining that he was going to go to England for money. If you said that today, like, oh, he's only going to England to play for money, you get slandered.
Times have changed.
Yeah.
I think it's crazy that at the time of Twellman's move, like Twellman was one of the best players in the league, and he was enraged because he wasn't getting a move to the bottom team in the championship. Like a
Right.
team fighting against relegation from League One, which is crazy. Because that's why I tried to make that heel comparison. Because imagine Carl's heels going, he's enraged because he can't get a move to Rotherham United in January. Like that's crazy. That would be insane. One of the wildest transfer sagas to happen in this league.
Well, that's kind of why I love this series, because you can look and see how much the league has changed in reputation and growth over just a short amount of time. Right. This is 2008. That's not even 20 years ago, where we're sitting here and people are like, oh my God. I watched back the Beckham and Red Bull versus LA Galaxy 5-4 game that we covered. It is the worst soccer game I've ever watched in my life. And it was less than 20 years ago. Like, it was awful. And we've grown so much in that space, but people are still, people only remember what they want to remember, right?
Yeah. I did a little math because I know you had mentioned it before I had even talked about my story. I had it in my
Nerd.
script already. About Twellman being like one of the biggest what ifs because he had to retire so early. I tried to figure out how many goals he would need to score per season, like assuming he was healthy in 2008 and 2009 and saying he plays like 5 more seasons. I believe that would have him retired around, I think, 34 years old, which is not an unrealistic age to retire at. So that's 7 more healthy seasons. He would have needed to average 11 and a half goals in those seasons, and he would be the top scorer in MLS history, which 11 and a half in those seasons is so manageable for him to do. He genuinely could have been like the top scorer in MLS history.
What ifs. Always what ifs. Oh, man. That's terrible. Well, like I said, I just found it funny when you talk about how people were complaining about his move to Europe, because, these days that would never happen. And You know, these days, these days, we see these silly debates online how MLS has no real fans because they're not real clubs. They're just franchises to make money. Well, people who are watching the league, they know that this isn't true. Whether it be the fans' presence in the club's first ever match, being present for championships or heartbreaking defeats, a club's connections to its fans is individual and determined by a single person, not by what somebody online says is a real club or not. It's even more impressive when the power of these fans drives MLS to their own front door. And that is where we get our story today. In the Pacific Northwest, this is how the Seattle Sounders name made it from the NASL all the way to MLS's doorstep. To do that, of course, we need to jump back in time prior to MLS days and talk about how Seattle has always had this rich and treasured footy history that has always been fan driven. Even when they started off in the NASL, the fans chose the name the Sounders through a fan vote. They had other legendary names like the Cascades, the Evergreens, the Mariners, which wouldn't have worked out so well, the Shooters, and the Sockeyes. All wonderful NASL names that would have been great fits. But for nearly a decade, starting in 1974, the Sounders boasted the top league attendance figures, so much so that they needed to expand the ground that they played in, Memorial Stadium, to almost 18,000 seats. Though on the field, they could never quite keep up with the success of Pele and the supercharged New York Cosmos, Seattle earned second place finishes in their existence twice. There was no secret that Seattle was a soccer town, but the struggles of the NASL as a league led to them folding in 1983. After that, America entered the dark period where soccer was persona non grata in the sports landscape until the launch of the APSL in 1990. When it did, the love for the Sounders ran true as former coach Alan Hinton purchased the naming rights to bring the team of the Sounders to the APSL. There were some hiccups as the Seattle had already had an APSL team at the time. They were waiting for them to switch leagues or fold or whatever, it may be. And they teamed up with new owners from Microsoft to get the funding to do it. The Sounders' legacy lived on, and they made their debut in the 1994 A-League, which was the APSL just renamed. They would take this debut in 1994 and top the league in their first ever season. On top of that, they would add regular season finishes at the top in 2002, 2007. Furthermore, they added 4 league championships in 95, 96, 05, and 07. However, through all this time, MLS was growing and thriving, and it was pretty clear what the goal was: get Seattle an MLS side. While the Sounders existed in the lower leagues, ownership groups from other areas were circling, trying to figure out how to put MLS in Seattle. There was debate whether MLS was the right move or if staying in the A-League made more sense at the time of MLS's start in 1996. Originally, a team needed 10,000 signatures to be considered for an MLS startup team, but because of this split, the Seattle area was failed to be awarded that club. After seeing how successful the APSL version of the Sounders were, MLS was driven away, but that was just for the time being. They tried a few more times, unsuccessfully for field conditions or other reasons, but in 2008, their expansion bid was heard. 2007, Don Garber and company were looking for another expansion area, and Seattle was still on the list. The expansion bid of $30 million was started with the A-League Sounders owner, Adrian Hanauer. He teamed up with producer Joe Roth and Paul Allen, the operator of Quest Field, home of the NFL's Seattle Seahawks. They were close, but felt that they needed one more name to get this bid over the line. Anybody who's seen Whose Line Is It Anyway knows this next name, and that is Drew Carey. His investment convinced Don Garber, and the expansion club was awarded to Seattle. At this point, there was only one thing left. What will the new team be called? The ownership had seen the Seattle Sounders name for years and thought it was time for a fresh start. In other areas, not like Seattle, this might have been accepted. Maybe they had a lower fan presence for the lower league side that existed, but that wasn't Seattle. Their massive fan base was not happy when they heard that the Sounders was not being considered. The team initially announced a crop of names, including the Seattle Alliance, Seattle FC, boo, and the Seattle Republic. However, fans took their power to the next level. They took their voice to any outlet that would hear it. Online forums, newspapers, pubs, people walking down the street, they made it known that they were not happy, and they were heard. These 4 owners of the Seattle Sounders were committed to creating a fan-friendly team. Listen to the fans and do as they ask. That is the theme of this team, and this is where it starts. After they were heard, the Sounders added a 4th option, a write-in option. Instantly, word spread at the opportunity to save the Sounders' name and bring it into the top division of American football. Blogs were made to ensure that the correct vote was casted, not to add FC to the end to make sure that everything was counted to the same Seattle Sounders name. Fans could choose the team name similar to the process 30 years ago. And with a similar process, there was a similar outcome. From over 15,000 votes, nearly 50% of them were for the original name, the Seattle Sounders. That's 7,500 people. As mentioned, the owners were committed to making this a fan-friendly club. And to do that, they listened. The Seattle Sounders were officially in MLS. For, I believe, legal reasons, FC was added onto the end of it just to differentiate between the two sides, but the Seattle Sounders had made it all the way to MLS. Frank McDonald on SoundersFC.com summarized what this team meant to the group. And he says, for some reason, the formative seasons of the NASL Sounders were sacred. So special was the connection between the lads and their legion of fans at Memorial Stadium. Capacity crowds, never a drop of rain on game days, rituals of the players giving a wave goodnight and going into the stand to give out roses. It was clear that this group was more than just a name. There were deep-slated traditions, decades old, memories and connections between fans and players that were tied directly to the players that were there. The name of the team they supported, all of it was one entity. It wasn't like something you could just get rid of. To get rid of it just for a shot at the top was unimaginable. So the fans made sure it never happened. So the next time someone tells you that there are no real fans in MLS, be sure to remind them of the brilliant support and love that the Sounders fans give their club each and every day.
One of the biggest crimes I feel like this league has done in the last few years has been the slow, like, I don't know if erasure is the word, but the slow, like, removal of all these, like, creative, fun names and just going to city name FC or city name SC. So boring. Or city name United. It's so boring.
Yeah.
So boring. Like we lost the Montreal Impact. That's such a fun name, and now we're CF Montreal. Ooh, that's gonna get the fans excited.
I vote we kick out any team that isn't named after a fun little mascot thing. So Atlanta United, see ya.
Listen, Energy Drink FC. We should boot you too.
Listen, the Red Bull is the greatest mascot in the league.
It has nothing to do with an actual bowl. It's just an energy drink company that has sponsored you.
That's wild. No, see, this is what I love, right? The connection. And it's the reason why I wish more lower league sides would make the move up. Now I know it's a lot harder to do these days, but again, with the fan bases that they already have, especially when they come from the NASL days where they were 30 years old instead of 5 or 10, that's where you bring the tradition from. That's where you bring all this stuff from. So I wish that more people would look to do that. Again, costs a little bit more these days, but that's always the goal. Thanks so much, everyone, for listening. We hope you enjoyed it. We love MLS history, so make sure you subscribe to listen to more of those, wherever you get podcasts, and follow us on Twitter, TikTok, and YouTube to see all of our clips and comments. Yeah, anything else you want to add? I think that's it.
Yeah, that's it.
All right, y'all. Thanks so much again. We hope you enjoyed it. See you next time on the next episode of the Designated Players and MLS Podcast. See ya.